What is up, y'all? Welcome back to my podcast, The Atlanta Audible. As usual, I'm your host, Ice Ray. In today's episode, I'll be comparing new GM Ian Cunningham to former general manager Terry Fontenot. The Falcons officially hired Cunningham on January 30th. On February 3rd, he made his introduction to Atlanta, and in his introductory presser, it's made vastly clear that his team-building philosophy is very, very different from that of Terry Fontenot's. For one, he believes in building up a team from the trenches.
We're going to build through the trenches. If you look at all those teams, that's the philosophy. Draft, develop, and retain. That's going to be our philosophy here too.
Fontenot hardly invested in the offensive line during his time with the Falcons. In his 5-year tenure in Atlanta, he made 36 draft selections, and of those picks, only 6 were offensive linemen. Jalen Mayfield, Justin Schaefer, Drew Dahlman, Matthew Bergeron, Jovan Gwynn, and Jack Nelson. Drew Dahlman was a good pick. He started at center for Atlanta for the last 4 seasons, before heading to the Chicago Bears during the 2025 offseason. Bergeron was also a good pick. He is currently the Falcons starter at left guard. Gwynn and Nelson are currently backups for Atlanta, with Gwynn seeing pass blocking snaps in 6 games this season due to injury. Schaefer and Mayfield are no longer in the NFL, and Mayfield is one of the worst offensive linemen I've ever watched with my own 2 eyes. Every Super Bowl team, as of late, has had a good offensive line. The Chiefs are 3-2 in the Super Bowl since 2019, and the 2 years they didn't win at all was when they had a subpar or worse offensive line. I mean, look at this. Even Patrick Mahomes, who's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, can't overcome a bad offensive line.
The 9. Again, running for his life. Mahomes got it away.
The perfect formula for the Falcons to emulate is the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that Cunningham worked with in the past. They built a great offensive line, the trenches, and had a superstar running back in Saquon Barkley serve as the engine to their offense as they went on to win it all just a season ago. You can't, of course, predict injuries, and Atlanta losing its starting right tackle right before the season, as well as his backup right tackle, is just terrible luck. But Terry Fontenot's refusal to get depth on the offensive line, not just this season, but in all the seasons prior as well, would really come back to bite the team this year. Elijah Wilkinson, who stepped in at right tackle, was simply not very good this year. He gave up a lot of penalties and hurt the team a lot during crucial moments this season.
Rip right past the tackle of the Atlanta Falcons, Elijah Wilkinson, and then
Penix wants the snap and he beats the play clock. Gets hit hard for the backside.
Defensively, Fontenot neglected the trenches a lot less. However, he did not invest a premium pick into the defense until the 2025 NFL Draft, and by then, it was already too late and the writing was on the wall for his time as GM in Atlanta. I'm once again going to compare the Falcons to the Eagles, because that's a team that Cunningham has close ties with, and they just won a Super Bowl very recently and drafted very, very well, building up from, who guessed it, but the trenches. From 2025 to 2026, the Eagles drafted players in the trenches with 5 of their 6 picks in the first 2 rounds. These players include Landon Dickerson, who's a Pro Bowler, Jordan Davis, Cam Jurgens, who's a Pro Bowler, Jalen Carter, who's an All-Pro, and Nolan Smith. That is just an insane hit rate. Meanwhile, from 2021 to 2023, Terry Fontenot addressed the trenches with just 2 of his 6 picks in the first 2 rounds of the draft. These players were Arnold Ebiketie and Matthew Bergeron. The other players he drafted include tight end Kyle Pitts, who was a second-team All-Pro this season, safety Richie Grant, who is now off the roster, wide receiver Drake London, and running back Bijan Robinson, who was a first-team All-Pro. While he did hit on London and Bijan, it's important to note that he kickstarted a rebuild by taking a tight end 4th overall. Not to mention, the Falcons and the Eagles both won 4 games in 2021. Since then, the Eagles have made the playoffs in 5 consecutive seasons, including a Super Bowl win just last year. Meanwhile, the Falcons have yet to cross the 8-win threshold in any of their past 5 seasons, and they have not made the playoffs since 2017. How did the Eagles achieve this remarkable turnaround? They built through the trenches. They drafted Pro Bowl offensive linemen in the second round of back-to-back drafts. They drafted an all-pro defensive tackle and then surrounded him with talent on the defensive side of the ball. The philosophy is that simple. Find great players in the trenches to build your team around. Terry was all about finding the skill players, but you can fill those guys in later. The Eagles drafted Devontae Smith 6th overall, but the rest of their offensive playmakers were added later on. They traded for A.J. Brown. They traded for Jahan Dotson. They signed Saquon Barkley in free agency. You see what I mean? So, Cunningham says that he wants to focus on the trenches. If that's true, a place that he really needs to invest in soon is the offensive line. Ironman Jake Matthews has been the Falcons starter at left tackle for over a decade. But he's 33, turning 34 next week, and the Falcons currently have no options behind him at the moment. On the other side of the line, right tackle Caleb McGarry is 30, turning 31 in a few weeks, coming off a torn ACL, and if this season proved anything, it's that the Falcons have no suitable options behind him at the right tackle position. That's just two places on the offensive line where the Falcons need to invest sooner rather than later. Defensively, the Falcons badly need a run stuffer on the line. David Onyemata is on the wrong side of 30 and is likely getting cut. Brendan Dorlus is a great pass rusher, but his run defense needs some refinement. Rook Ororo has been disappointing as a run defender. So, if Cunningham really wants to build up the trenches, he can start by investing in both the offensive and defensive side of the ball this offseason, where the Falcons clearly have positions that they need to address. Another big difference is how they treat their draft picks. To Ian Cunningham, draft picks are currency. They're money. They're immensely valuable.
I love picks, man. So you use those as currency, right? You can use it as trading up. You can trade for players, proven players. It allows you more swings at the plate. So there's different ways you can use them, but that's why we value them. That's why we will value them. We only have 5 right now. But we only had 5 in Chicago my first year there too, and I think we ended up with 10. So
here's where yet another philosophical divide comes true. Fontenot loved to trade up, but what he would hardly ever do is trade back and replenish the ammunition. It was a one-way street for Terry Fontenot. In fact, the Falcons have traded up in each of the last 4 drafts since 2022. In 2022, the Falcons traded up from 43 to 38 to select edge rusher Arnold Ebiketie. Keep in mind, this was the board at the time. The Denver Broncos got a decoy candidate 20 picks later in Nick Bonito, and Arnold Ebiketie had 2 sacks in 2025. In 2023, the Falcons jumped from 44 again to 38 to select left guard Matthew Bergeron. This trade, I'm fine with. The Falcons had to jump the Cowboys, with Dallas showing interest in the guard to select him. You know the guy's going to be a good offensive lineman if the Cowboys want to draft him. So, I'm happy with it, and he's been close to a Pro Bowl level starter at left guard. In 2024, the Falcons traded up from 43 to 35 to select interior defender Rook Ororo. This one is hard to justify given all the elite talent still on the board at the time. 3 defensive tackles, all arguably better than Ororo, went within the next 4 picks. 2 elite corners went within the next 7 picks. If Atlanta had stood pat at 43, they would have had their choice between Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard, and Mike Sainstro. Not to mention, they would have had an extra 3rd in their arsenal as well. In 2025, the Falcons traded back in the first round of the NFL draft and selected edge rusher James Pierce Jr. 26th overall. In order to get this deal done, the Falcons surrendered their 2025 second-round pick as well as their 2026 first-round pick, and they got back the 26th overall pick and a 3rd-round pick. They would trade this 3rd-round pick to move up 5 spots and select safety Xavier Watts. This was a masterful trade. Full props to Terry Fontenot for getting this done. James Pierce Jr. led all rookies in sacks with 10.5. Do you guys see what happens when you invest a premium pick into the trenches? Not to mention, safety Xavier Watts had 5 interceptions, most of all rookies, and tied for second most in the NFL. In the 2025 ESPN's redraft, he went 32nd overall. So it was a steal for the Falcons to get him in the 3rd round. So, of Terry Fontenot's 4 trade-ups in the last 4 years, 2 were good, a 50% success rate, which is not very good. Not to mention, of the last 4 drafts, he did not trade down once to accumulate more picks, which is something that Cunningham said he would want to do. Ian Cunningham was part of the Bears staff that pulled off the blockbuster Bryce Young trade. In 2023, the Bears traded the first overall pick to the Carolina Panthers. In exchange, they got Carolina's 9th overall pick in 2023, their 61st overall pick in 2023, their first round pick in 2024, which would end up being the first overall pick, their 2025 second round pick, and wide receiver DJ Moore. Quite the haul for the Chicago Bears. The picks would end up turning into Caleb Williams, who's arguably better than Bryce Young, Darnell Wright, Tyreek Stevenson, Torrey Taylor, and Luther Burden. Just a masterful trade by the Bears franchise that helped set up their team for the future. And it worked. In 2025, the team won 11 games. They won the NFC North, and they won a playoff game, something the Falcons have not done since 2017. They haven't won the division since 2016. Now, Cunningham is not saying that he'll never trade up. Instead, hinting to how cautious he will be with his draft capital, likening them to money. And you never want to be reckless with your money. I would say that Terry was too reckless with Atlanta's picks. He would trade them away all the time. I already hit up on all the trade-ups he did during the draft, but he also traded a third-round pick for Matthew Judon ahead of the 2024 NFL season. The Falcons would trade a day 2 pick for a 32-year-old coming off a season-ending injury. Just a terribly risky move, looking back in hindsight. Cunningham is saying all the right things. You gotta build from the trenches if you want to create a Super Bowl contending roster. Not to mention, if you treat your draft assets as if they're extremely valuable, that's exactly how you get those Super Bowl caliber players on your roster. But it's up to Cunningham to prove that he means what he says, and these are not just empty promises to Falcons fans. As usual, thank you for tuning in. Leave a like, leave a sub. I'm Ice Ray, and Ice Ray out.